Slánský trial. The Slánský trial officially Proces vedením protistátního spikleneckého centra v čele s Rudolfem Slánským English, trial of the leadership of the anti-state conspiracy center headed by Rudolf Slánský was a 1952 antisemitic show trial against 14 members of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia KSČ, including many high-ranking officials. Several charges, including high treason, were announced against the group on the grounds of allegedly conspiring against the Czechoslovak Republic. First Secretary of the KSČ Rudolf Slánský was the alleged leader of the conspirators. All 14 defendants were found guilty. 11 of them were sentenced to death and executed. The remaining 3 received a life sentence. Background: after World War II, Czechoslovakia initially enjoyed limited democracy. This changed with the February 1948 coup carried out by the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia without the assistance of the Soviet Union. According to literature scholar Peter Steiner, the one-party communist state had to find or conjure up imaginary enemies from within to justify its continuing existence. This was the motive for show trials. After the 1948 Yugoslav-Soviet split, a number of political trials against alleged Titoite and Western imperialist elements were carried out in Bulgaria, Hungary, and Albania, but these trials were not overtly anti-Semitic. The anti-cosmopolitan campaign, a thinly disguised anti-Semitic campaign in the Soviet Union, began in the fall of 1948 and continued until the dictator Joseph Stalin's. During this period, the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee's leadership was murdered and anti-Semitic purges spread to other countries in the Eastern Bloc, including East Germany, Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary. The Slánský trial was immediately preceded by the 1949 trial of Hungarian communist Laszlo Rajk and his co-defendants, the first show trial victims accused of organizing a worldwide Zionist conspiracy. Although Rajk was not Jewish, 6 of the other defendants were. Linking Zionism with Trotskyism and Titoism, as Rajk's prosecutors did, defied logic because both leftist movements were noted for their anti-Zionism. Arrests and interrogation. The trial was orchestrated and the subsequent terror staged in Czechoslovakia on the order of Moscow leadership by Soviet advisors, who were invited by Rudolf Slánský and Klement Gottwald, with the help of the Czechoslovak state security personnel following the Laszlo Rajk trial in Budapest in September 1949. Klement Gottwald, president of Czechoslovakia and leader of the Communist Party, feared being purged and decided to sacrifice Slánský, a longtime collaborator and personal friend, who was the second in command of the party. The others were picked to convey a clear threat to different groups in the state bureaucracy. A couple of them, Sad, Ryson, were brutal sadists, conveniently added for a more realistic show. Those put on trial confessed to all crimes under duress or after torture and were sentenced to punishment. Slánský attempted suicide while in prison. The people of Czechoslovakia signed petitions asking for death for the alleged traitors. Apropos of the conspiracy theories of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, prosecutors claimed that a Zionist imperialist summit had taken place in Washington, D.C. in April 1947 with President Truman, Undersecretary of State Dean Acheson, former Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau Jr., David Ben-Gurion, and Moshe Sharett in attendance. The prosecution charged that defendants were acting in accordance with a so-called Morgenthau Plan, not to be confused with the contemporaneous Morgenthau plan for German heavy industry to commit espionage and sabot. Czechoslovakia was seen as especially pro-Zionist due to their armament support for Israel during the Palestine War. Ironically, most of the defendants were known to be ardent anti-Zionists. Trial. In November 1952, Slánský and 13 other high-ranking communist bureaucrats, 10 of whom were Jews, were arrested and charged with being Titoists and Zionists. The trial lasted 8 days. Many of the defendants admitted their guilt and requested death. On the last day of the trial, Rudolf Slánský, General Secretary of the KSC, and other leading party members were pronounced guilty. 11, including Slánský, were hanged in Prague on 3 December and 3, one of whom was Archer London, were sentenced to life imprisonment. The state prosecutor at the trial in Prague was Josef Ervalik. Executions. Many Czechoslovak citizens were in favor of harsh measures against the supposed traitors. Czech poet Ivan Skala infamously called for a dog's death, for such dogs Czech, Sovětské smrt. 11, including Slánský, were hanged at Pankrek prison on December 3, 1952. Reaction. Domestic. A Czech worker sent to attend the trial reported that the defendants did not display any emotion. He wondered why they were not afraid for their lives. On 14 December 1952, a few days after the execution, Zdeněk Nejedlý, Minister of Education, denied rumors that the confessions had been obtained with torture or drugs. Instead, the defendants admitted to their crimes because of the overwhelming evidence against them and because of their shame and guilt. After the deaths of both Stalin and Gottwald in March 1953, the harshness of the persecutions slowly decreased, and the victims of the trial quietly received amnesty one by one, including those who had survived the Prague trial. Later, the official historiography of the Communist Party was rather quiet on the trial, vaguely putting blame on errors that happened as a result of a cult of personality. Many other political trials followed on, sending many innocent victims to jail and hard labor in Jachimov uranium mines and labor camps. The full transcript of the trial was released in 1953. Steiner described it as an utterly indigestible book, crammed with so many names, dates, and particulars that I had a hard time finishing it and remembering all the details. International. Raphael Lemkin considered the trial an example of judicial murder, and, along with the fabrication of evidence to claim Jewish doctors were plotting to kill Soviet officials, the spuriously alleged doctors' plot, a potential precursor to the genocide of Jews in the Soviet bloc. He asked the United Nations to launch an investigation into the alleged genocide of Jews in the Soviet bloc. In commentary, Peter Mayer wrote that the Prague trial with its lurid tale of a Zionist conspiracy recalled the Tsarist invented and Nazi popularized legend of the Elders of Zion. David Ben-Gurion, speaking hypothetically in the wake of both the doctor's plot trial and the Slánský trial, considered suppressing Mackey, the Israeli Communist Party. In internal discussions, Ben-Gurion suggested he would favor this even to the point of throwing communist activists in concentration camps, though he spoke of this as being a potential response rather than an imminent necessity. If there is a need to build camps, we will do it. If there is a need to shoot, we will shoot. We have already been through times when there was a need to shoot people who were even closer to us. This last comment referred to an earlier moment in Israel's recent history where he first warned and then approved firing on the right-wing paramilitary group or gun. A majority of the cabinet opposed Ben-Gurion's view, including Golda Meir and Pinchas Lavon. Lavon noted in the discussion that an attempt to detain members of Mackey would result in greater, not lesser, influence for the party. The cabinet, by a vote of 13-7, voted for an alternate proposal which permitted the employment of all means at the government's disposal, in the framework of the existing law and of laws yet to be passed, to deny Mackey the opportunity to take public action without declaring it an organization that exists outside the law. Defense of the American Jewish Soviet spy. Proponents of clemency argued that the Rosenbergs were actually innocent Jewish peace activists. According to American historian Ronald Radosh, the Soviet Union's goal was to deflect the world's attention from the sordid execution of the innocent Slánský trial defendants in Prague. Modern interpretations. Martin Wayne noted that although Slánský was not guilty of the charges he was forced to admit, he was guilty of mass murder as a high-level functionary in the communist government. In Wayne's opinion, because all of the defendants except Simone occupied high positions in the Czechoslovak communist regime, They had command responsibility for crimes committed by it. Wayne further noted that the three reprieved defendants all came from an upper-class background, while all of the middle-class and working-class defendants were executed. He hypothesizes that this was because if an upper-class person was a traitor to the Communist Party, he was not a traitor to his class. According to Stephen Norwood, the Slánský trial was the clearest illustration yet of state-sponsored antisemitism in the Soviet bloc and a secularized version of the Spanish Inquisition's racialized antisemitism, because it insisted on that Jewish origin was an indelible defect which would pass to all descendants, similar to the guilt of Jewish deicide. In popular culture, Archer London, one of the survivors of the trial, eventually moved to France, where he published his memoirs. His book in French, called Allez-vous the Confession, is a major source about the trial. In 1970, French filmmaker Costa Gavras directed the film Allez-vous based on London's memoirs, starring Yves Montand and Simone Signoret. The film had a major impact in France and abroad. The Slánský trial is also a key element of the book under a cruel star. A memoir by Hedda Margolius Kovaly, the book follows the life of a Jewish woman, starting with her escape from a concentration camp during World War II, up until her departure from Czechoslovakia after the Warsaw Pact countries' invasion of 1968. Kovaly's husband, Rudolf Margolius, a fellow Holocaust survivor, was one of the 11 men executed during the Slánský trial. More encompassing information is available in the more recent book Hitler, Stalin, and I, an interview of Hedda Margolius Kovaly by Helena Trestakova published in 2018. Wayne was critical of the positive image of Margolius in Kovaly's book, and in other media Igor Lukes described him as a clean man in a filthy time, which he felt downplayed Margolius' complicity with the Stalinist regime. The Slánský trial is the subject of the documentary A Trial in Prague, directed by Zuzana Justman 2083 Min. On 22 March 2018, it was announced that insolvency administrators discovered 8.5 hours of original footage from the trial at a factory near Prague. The film was heavily damaged, and restoration is expected to take several years, to be paid for by the Ministry of Culture. Footnotes: